cruel one. In the process, we may end up turning history from a source of understanding into a mere vocabulary of grievance. At a deeper level, what we are witnessing is a shift in the function of history itself. Instead of serving as a means of understanding the evolution of our society, our history is increasingly drawn into the project of defining identity. It is used to delineate boundaries, to separate communities, to separate narratives, and to separate competing visions of the nation. In doing so, it risks narrowing a past that was in reality far more expansive and far more inclusive. The consequence is not merely a difference of interpretation, but a transformation in how the past is engaged with. History ceases to be a field of inquiry and becomes a resource to be mobilized. And when that happens, the danger is not only that we misunderstand the past, but that we constrain and limit the possibilities of our present. What then does responsible historiography require? It requires first and foremost intellectual seriousness. It requires fidelity to evidence, a respect for context, and a refusal to force the past into the service of the predetermined conclusions and agenda of the present. It requires us to distinguish between inquiry and advocacy, between interpretation and instrumentalization. It also requires humility, because the past is always larger than the narratives we construct about it. In the Indian context, responsible historiography must be equal to the scale and diversity of the civilization it's seeking to describe. It must be able to hold together multiple strands without panic, to recognize continuity without erasing conflict, and to recognize conflict without denying continuity. It must resist both sentimental nostalgia and partisan simplification. This surely is what the better traditions of Indian thought have asked of us. Nehruji saw India as layered and cumulative, a civilization, as I said earlier, a palimpsest marked by successive accretions rather than a singular essence. Gandhiji's moral imagination, in a different register, insisted upon coexistence as an ethical principle. They did not imagine India as a brittle identity sustained by exclusion, but as a shared inheritance made possible by accommodation. A confident nation does not fear complexity in its past. It has the courage to look at history in its fullness, neither sanitized nor weaponized. It does not seek from history the comfort of unanimity, but the discipline of understanding. We return then, and I need to wrap up now, to the question with which we began. Who writes our past? The answer, as we have seen, is not confined to historians alone. It lies with institutions, with politicians, with educators, with those who shape public discourse, and in the broader sense, it lies with all of us. For a way in which a society remembers the past is never entirely separate from the way it understands itself in the present. History is not simply inherited. It is interpreted, it is debated, and at times it is contested. But the manner in which we engage with it carries consequences. A past that is narrowed becomes in a civilization as layered as India's, this choice requires particular significance and acquires particular significance. The story of India cannot be reduced to a single thread without losing what makes it distinctive. It is and has always been a confluence of influences, a record of encounters that have shaped a shared, if complex, inheritance that is for all of us. To recognize this is not to deny difference, but to situate it within a larger continuity. The task before us, therefore, is not to arrive at a single definitive account of the past, but to preserve the conditions under which multiple accounts can coexist. Your history, my history, her history, how does it matter? Let all of them exist, let all of them be examined and where necessary be challenged. But when history is approached with seriousness, it does not offer certitudes in any case. It offers understanding. It does not close the right to question, it refines the questions. And in this sense, the writing of history is not only an intellectual exercise, it's a civic exercise. It shapes the terms on which we relate to one another, the boundaries that we draw, and the possibilities we imagine for ourselves as a society. And perhaps this is where the deeper responsibility lies. Not merely in getting the past right, because there may be no one right. There may be very many complicated interpretations. I think of one example, I don't know if anybody is presenting a discussion on that, the so-called Mopla rebellion in Kerala in the 1920s, when there are so many dramatically contested narratives. There is a liberal Muslim interpretation of a secular Muslim anti-colonial revolt. There is a Marxist or class-based interpretation of a peasant revolt against landlords. The landlords happened to be Hindu, the peasants happened to be Muslim, therefore it was not communal according to the Marxists. Now there is a new so-called Hindu nationalist interpretation which sees this purely in communal terms. There are more complex interpretations that sees elements of all of these in what happened. And there are pieces of evidence to support every interpretation. How do you tell the story? How do you work it out? But that is precisely the point. It is part of the possibilities we imagine for ourselves as a society that we see all these sides at the same time. So, as I say, it's not merely about getting the past right. It's in ensuring that our engagement with it enlarges rather than diminishes the horizons of the present. For a nation's relationship with its history is ultimately a reflection of its confidence in itself. A society that is secure in itself, secure in our identity, we can afford complexity. One that is not secure will seek refuge in simplification. The question, therefore, is not only who writes our past, but whether we have the intellectual honesty and the civic courage to allow that past to remain as rich, as layered, and as open as it truly is. A nation that is at ease with the complexity of its history is better placed not only to sustain the diversity of its present, but to imagine a future that is worthy of that inheritance. I really thank you all for listening to me. I apologize I have to